Hello students, welcome to your online classes. I am Mrs. Nehal More, and children, today we are going to learn chapter 4 of history. What books and burials tells us. So let's begin our today's chapter. Chapter number 4, what books and burials tells us. Mary in the library. As the bell rang, teacher asked the students to follow him because they were going to the library for the first time. When Mary stepped inside, she found that the library was much larger than their classroom, and there were so many shelves, all full of books. In one corner was a cupboard filled with large old volumes. Seeing her trying to open the cupboard, the teacher said, "That cupboard has very special books on different religions. Did you know that we have set of the Vedas?" Now, what are Vedas? Mary wondered. Let us find out. One of the oldest book. Now, what are Vedas? We are going to learn. One of the oldest book in the world. Vedas are one of the oldest book in the world. You may have heard about the Vedas. There are four of them: the Rigveda, Samveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. The oldest Veda is the Rigveda, which was composed about 3500 years ago. Rigveda was composed 3500 years ago. The Rigveda includes more than the 1000 hymns called Sukta, or well said. These hymns are in the praise of various gods and goddesses. Three gods are especially important. First one, Agni, the god of fire. Next, Indra, the warrior god, and Soma, a plant from which a special drink was prepared. These hymns were composed by sages, that means rishis. Priests taught students to recite and memorize each syllable, word, and sentence bit by bit with great care. Most of the hymns were composed, taught, and learnt by men. A few were composed by women. The Rig Veda is the old or Vedic Sanskrit, which is the different form of Sanskrit you learn in the school these days. Now, see the importance of Rig Veda. Rig Veda had lots of hymns in it, and it was composed by the rishis. So, and it also was memorized. Each syllable, each word, and the sentence was memorized, and priest used to teach the students. Understood? And it was in Sanskrit. Now, Sanskrit and the other language. Sanskrit is a part of family of languages known as Indo-European. Some Indian languages such as Assami, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmiri, and Sindhi, Asian languages such as Persian, and many European languages such as English, French, German, Greek, and Italian, and Spanish belong to this family. They are called family because they originally had words in common. Why are they called family? Because they have common words. Now let us see an example. Take a word matra. Matru means what in Sanskrit? Mother, right? Take a word matru. In Sanskrit it's called matra. In Hindi it's called ma, and in English it's called mother. So M is common over here. So it's taken, these are called family words. Do you notice any similarities? Other languages used in the subcontinent belong to the different families. Now other languages belong to different families. For example, those used in the northeast. Northeast belong to the Tibeto-Burman family. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam belong to the Dravidian family, and the languages spoken in the Jharkhand and the parts of central India belong to the Austro-Asiatic family. So these are different kinds of language families. The books we use were written and printed. The Rig Veda was recited and heard rather than read. So very important. Nowadays, which the books we use are written and they are printed. But the Rig Veda was recited, means they used to say those mantras, okay, and it was heard. They were reciting and hearing. It, rather than it was read, means only few people used to know how to read it. Okay, it was written down several centuries after it was first composed. It was written after several centuries it was composed, and printed less than 2000 years ago, 200 years ago. Okay, it was printed just 200 years ago. How historians study the Rigveda? Now, how we understand about the Rigveda, how the historians are studying about them, let's see. Historians, like archaeologists, find about the past, but in addition, the material remains, they examine written sources as well. Let us see how they study the Rigveda. Some of the hymns in the Rigveda are in the form of dialogues. This is a part of one such hymn is a dialogue between a sage named Vishwamitra and the two rivers Beas and Satluj. They were worshipped as goddesses. Now, the hymn of a Rigveda is also in the form of dialogues, and this is see it's studied, and then we can assume what type of people were at that time. Understood? So here is, see, a page from a manuscript of a Rigveda. This manuscript of a Rigveda is on a birch bark, was found in Kashmir. It was found in Kashmir, and about 150 years ago it was used to prepare one of the earliest printed text of the Rigveda, as well as an English translation. It is now preserved in the library in Pune, Maharashtra. It was written around 150 years ago, and now it is preserved in the library of Maharashtra. It is in Pune. Okay. Now, what was the conversation between Vishwamitra and the rivers? See, now Vishwamitra says, O rivers, come down from the mountains like two swift horses, like two shining cows, and that lick their calves. You move their chariots to the sea through the power of Indra. You are the full of water and wish to unite with one another. And then the rivers asked, we who are full of water move along the path of gods have made for us. Once we start flowing, we cannot be stopped. Why do you pray for us, O sage? Vishwamitra says, O sisters, please listen to me. The singer who has come from a distance with his chariots and carts. Let your waters not rise our axles so that we can cross safely. The river says, we will listen to your prayers so that you can cross safely. What do we understand by this conversation between Vishwamitra and the rivers? Historians point out that the hymn was composed in the area where these rivers flow. First thing we understood that this hymn was composed in the area where these two rivers are there. They also suggest that the sage lived in the society where the horses and cows were valued animals. They also says that the sage was comparing holy rivers to the horses and the cows. That means he lived in the society where the horses and the cows were valued more, and that is why the rivers are compared to the horses and cows. Other rivers, especially the Indus and its tributaries and the Saraswati, are also named in the hymns. The Ganga and the Yamuna are named only once. Okay. Now the cattle, horses, and chariots. There are many prayers in the Rigveda for cattle, children's, especially sons, and the horses. Horses were yoked to the chariots that were used in the battles, which were fought to capture cattle. Battles were done for also not only for the land, but also they were fought to capture the cattle, which was important for the pasture and for growing hardy crops that ripened quickly, such as barley. Some battles were fought for water and to capture people. Now, at that time, that means 3500 years ago, why the battles were done? First, to capture the cattle. At that time, cattle were having a lot of value. Cattle means what? Cows, buffaloes. Okay, so they were having huge value at that time. So battles were done to capture these cattle, and also to capture the land where they can grow hardy crops, and also the pasture means a food for the cattle. and hardy crops such as barley. Some battles were fought for the water, some battles were also fought for the water and also to capture people. Some of the wealth that was obtained was kept by the leaders, some was given to the priest, and the rest was distributed amongst the people. So what they did with the wealth which was obtained from the battle, some was kept by the leaders, some was given to the priest, and the other remaining was distributed among the people. Some wealth was used for performance of yagna or sacrifices in which offerings were made into the fire. These were meant for gods and goddesses. Offerings could include ghee, grain, and in some cases animals. Most men took part in these wars. There were no regular army, but there were assemblies where people meet and discussed matters of war and peace. They also chose leaders who were often brave and skillful warriors. Now, words to describe people. There are several ways to describing people in terms of the work they do, the language they speak, the place they belong to, their family, their communities, and cultural practices. How we can describe the people? We can describe the people by which work they are doing, which language they are speaking, right? Which place they are belonging to, which family they are belonging to, their community, their cultural practices. By this we can describe people. Let us see some of the words used to describe the people found in the Rigveda. Now let us see how in that time people used to describe each other, what we have found in Rigveda. There were two groups which are described in the term of their work. The priest, sometimes called Brahmins, who performed various rituals, and the Rajas. These Rajas were not like the ones you will be learning about later. They did not have the capital cities, palaces, or armies, nor did they collect taxes. Now, see, there were two groups. First, priest, called Brahmins, sometimes called Brahmins, who performed various rituals, and Raja. First were Brahmins or the priest, and the other one Raja. Raja means doesn't, it's not king which we know now. It was different. Okay, so he was a leader. Only he was a leader. He didn't have any capital cities. He didn't have huge palaces, armies, or even he didn't collected taxes. Generally, sons did not automatically succeed as Rajas. Raja's son will not become Raja. Okay, two words were raised to describe the people or the community as a whole. One was the word Jan, which we still use in Hindi and other languages. The other was Vaishya. The word Vaishya comes from Vish. You will learn more about this in chapter 5. Several Vish or Jana are mentioned by the name. So we can do the reference of Purujana or Vish, the Bharat Jana or Vish, the Yadu Jana or Vish, and so on. Sometimes the people who composed the hymns described themselves as Aryas and called their opponents Dasas or Dasyas. These were the people who did not perform sacrifices and probably spoke different languages. Later, the term Dasa and the feminine Dasi came to the mean captured in the war. They were treated as a property of their owners who could make them to do whatever work they wanted. While the Rigveda was being composed in the northwest in the subcontinent, there were other development elsewhere. At Let us look at the sum of these. Now, there were Dasa and Dasis, and they were born in the war, and anyhow a leader can treat them. So how it was different in different states, let's see. Now look at the illustration on the next page. These stones bundles are known as megaliths, literally big stones. These were carefully arranged by people and were used to mark a burial site. The practice of erecting megaliths began about 3000 years ago and was prevalent throughout the Deccan, South India, in the northeast, and the Kashmir. Now, very important, I will tell you. See, these were the megaliths. Now, what are megaliths? We will learn. Some important megalith sites are shown in map 2, page 13. While some megaliths can be seen on the surface, other megaliths burials are often underground. Sometimes megaliths means what? Huge rocks. Can you see here? Huge rocks are here. And now why these rocks are kept, I will tell you. Sometimes archaeologists find a circle of stone boundlers or the single large stone standing on the ground. Why they are standing there? So that they can indicate that here somebody is buried inside, somebody is buried under the ground. How they used to find? Now we are having maps. At that time they were not having maps, right? Now the huge land was under forest. So how the people can find where the people are buried? To indicate the burial place, they used to keep a huge stone. So that was huge stone was called as megalith. Okay, now see, this kind of arrangement was done. So this place can be found easily. We can find this place, and in that from that we can understand that we have buried a person over here, a dead person. Understood? All these burials have common features. Generally, the dead were buried with distinctive pots, which are called black and red ware. Also pots are found tools and weapons of iron, and sometimes skeletons of horses, horse equipments, and ornaments of stone and gold. See, understood? They not only buried a person, but along with them, horses were also buried, tools, weapons, everything was buried with the person. So this kind of megalith is known as, see, portholes which could be used in the entrance. So this type of things are found in it. Okay. Archaeologists think that the objects found with the skeleton probably belong to the dead persons. Archaeologists think that whatever objects were found, probably it belonged to that dead person. Sometimes more objects are found in one grave than in another. Sometimes in one grave there are more objects, in the other grave there are less objects. From that what we can understand, some are poor, some are rich, right? From Brahmagiri on map 2, years on one skeleton was buried with 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and 1 conch shell. Other skeletons have only a few pots. These finds suggest that there were some differences in status amongst the people who were buried. Some were rich, others poor, some were chief, others were followers. Understood? Where some burial spots mean for certain families. Now we can understand where these burial spots were for certain families. Sometimes megaliths contains more than one skeleton. Sometimes in one megalith we can find many skeletons. Okay, this indicates that people perhaps belonging to the same family were buried in the same place, though not at the same time. People belonging to the same family was buried in the, if a father dies, he was buried there. If uncle dies, he will be buried there. Son dies, mother dies, means they were having their own family megalith. Understood? The bodies of those who died later were brought into the grave through the portholes. Stone circles are boundless, placed on the surface, probably served as a sign spots to find the burial site. So the huge stones were set as a sign spot, served as a sign spot. It made them easy to find the burial site. Okay, so that people could return to the same place whenever they wanted to. Okay, find the Inam Gaon. Inam Gaon map second. It is a site of the river Ghod, a tributary of the Bhima. It was occupied between 3600 and 2700 years ago. Here, adults were generally buried in the ground, laid out straight with the head down towards the north. Sometimes burials were within the houses. Vessels that probably contained food and water were placed with the dead. One man was found buried in a large four-legged clay jar in the courtyard of a five-roomed house, one of the largest house in the site. Some of the some of the burial sites were in the houses also. They used to bury a dead person in their house only. See here, there is an example. One man, he was found buried in a large four-legged clay jar, in a huge clay jar. Clay means what? Mitti, okay, mati. So clay jar, he was buried in a clay jar in the courtyard. Courtyard means angan, okay? Courtyard of a 5-room houses, one of the largest site in the, it's one of the largest house at the site. In, okay, just a moment. Okay, in the center of the settlement, and this house also had a granary, and the body was placed in the cross-legged position. Okay, now what skeletal tells studies tell us. Now what do we learn from the skeletons which are obtained underground, from underground? It is easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. It is easy that we can easily recognize it is the skeleton of a child. Why? How we can recognize? Because it is small in size. However, there are no major differences in the bones of a girl and a boy. There are no major differences in the bones of girls and a boy. Can we make out whether the skeleton was that of a man or a woman? Sometimes people decide on the basis of what is found with the skeleton. For instance, if a skeleton is found with a jewelry, it is sometimes thought to be of the woman. However, there were the problem with this. Often men also used to wear ornaments. Sometimes when the skeleton is found with the jewelry, archaeologists used to assume that it might be a woman, but there was a problem. Why? Because in those days even the men used to wear ornaments like ladies. Okay, the better way of figuring about the sex of a skeleton is to look at the bone structure. The hip or the pelvic area of a woman is generally larger to enable childbearing. These distinctions are based on the modern skeletal studies. About 2000 years ago, there was a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as the Charaka Samhita. There he states that a human body has 360 bones. This is much larger number than the 200 bones that are recognized in the modern anatomy. Charaka arrived in this figure by counting the teeth, joints, and cartilage. Okay. So, occupations of Inamgaon. Archaeologists have found seeds of wheat, barley, pulses, rice, millets, peas, and sesame. Bones of the number of the animals, many bearing cut marks, and that show that may have used as a food. They also have been found. Archaeologists, now what was the occupation of the people in the Inamgaon? Archaeologists have found the seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas, and sesame. They also found the bones of number of animals, many bearing cut marks. There were cut marks, that means they were used as a food, that show that they might be have been used as a food. Also, they also have found these cattle include buffalo, goat, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, sambar, spotted deer, black duck, antelope, hare, mongoose. Besides birds, crocodile, turtle, crab, and fish, there is evidence that fruits such as bear, amla, jamun, dates, and the variety of berries were collected. Okay. Now, elsewhere, this is very important. Find China in your atlas. Around 3500 years ago, we find some of the first evidence of writings in China. These writings were on animal bones. These were called oracle bones because they were used to predict the future. Why they were called oracle bones? Because these bones used to predict the future. Kings got scribes to write questions on the bones. Whatever questions were there in the king's mind, they used to write it on the bones. And such as, would they win the battle? Would the harvest be good? Would they have sons? The bones were then put in the fire, and the questions used to be written on the bone, and that bone was put in the fire, and they cracked because of the heat, and the bone used to crack because of the heat, and then the fortune tellers will study the cracks on that bone and they will predict the future. This was done in 3500 years ago in China. These kings lived in palaces in cities. They amassed vast quantities of wealth, including large elaborately decorated bronze vessels. However, they did not use the iron. Okay, understood this, children? So by this we end with our today's chapter. So what we have learned in today's chapter, that what we learn from the books and the burials, old books and the burials. What we studied about the Rigveda, Samveda, Yajurveda, Atharvaveda, and also we studied about the megaliths. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed watching the video. Thank you for watching. Thank you and have a nice day.